Good afternoon. Nice to see you all. Welcome to Millsaps on this gorgeous spring afternoon, this beautiful campus. We're very pleased to have you here. My name is Pearigen. It's my privilege to serve as president of Millsaps and to welcome you here today and to our panelists. About a year and a half ago, many of us here today gathered in the same room to reflect on and celebrate the Education Reform Act of 1982, and also to discuss ongoing challenges facing public education in Mississippi. Governor William Winter stood here at this podium and offered words that made us all feel very part of that historic 1982 legislation. But he didn't dwell on the past. In fact, he reminded us of our ongoing responsibility to this state and to this world to leave it better than we found it. And he inspired me and others here at Millsaps to live up to that legacy of Millsaps as an intellectual oasis, a place where ideas and actions connect and are guided by a commitment to the common good. That intellectual oasis is an image that we continue to embrace. So we're here today to take part in many ways because of the generosity of two people who, on that same day in November 2012, were stirred by Governor Winter's comments, and following that panel discussion, these two generous alums made an anonymous gift of $100,000 to establish the Elise and William Winter Speaker Series here at Millsaps. This series honors the spirit and determination of the Winters in their decades-long fight for a better Mississippi. And the endowment, which is held by the Community Foundation of Greater Jackson, will help ensure that Millsaps can continue to and expand the opportunities, really, for students, for Jackson citizens, for the community leaders and others to gather and discuss important issues of public significance. So Millsaps is, and I think Governor Winter will be here at some point this afternoon. Millsaps is deeply grateful to the donors for ensuring the continued success of this public forum, this process, and for helping us reinforce a key component of our strategic plan that's titled Across the Street and Around the Globe, Partnerships and Influence at Millsaps College. We at Millsaps believe we have an opportunity and a responsibility to bring important topics and speakers to the public's attention, to be a public square of sorts, and we're especially pleased and honored to have our name linked with Governor and Mrs. Winter. Earlier this semester, the Winter Series provided an opportunity for us to gather with leaders in the fields of government, medicine, insurance, and legal advocacy to discuss the Affordable Care Act and its implications for Mississippi. Today, the Winter Series brings us together to discuss public education funding. Perhaps no issue is more important to Mississippi's future than public education, and few issues related to public education are as prone to controversy as those surrounding funding. So we hope that today's discussion clears up some of the confusion and in the process helps us all become better informed and more engaged citizens. So with that end in mind, we have an extremely knowledgeable, experienced, and accomplished leaders from the field of education, government, grassroots advocacy, and the nonprofit sector here today to join us and to help us sort through these issues. Let me introduce them, going from this side down. Cecil Brown is a 14-year veteran of the Mississippi House of Representatives and is the former chair of the House Education Committee. An investment advisor by training, Representative Brown has served in various positions in state government, including state fiscal officer, executive director of the Department of Finance and Administration, and chief of staff to the governor. Ravi Gupta is the founder and executive director of Nashville Prep, and he helped lead that school to be named the highest performing charter school in the state of Tennessee by Stanford University for 2 consecutive years. He's held various positions in government and education, but he's likely familiar to many of us in this room for his plans to help open Mississippi's first charter school in 2015. Todd Ivey works at Mississippi's Department of Education and apparently has been promoted in the last few days, making our promotional materials a little outdated. Sorry about that. Mr. Ivy has served in various positions at Department of Education, including Bureau Manager, Deputy State Superintendent in the Office of Accountability, and apparently in the last few days, a Chief Operating Officer. We got that right?
That's right.
Good. Congratulations.
Thank you.
As Executive Director of the Parents Campaign, Nancy Loome has become, for many, the face of grassroots advocacy on behalf of public education in Mississippi. With an understanding of public education funding that is truly comprehensive, Nancy regularly and passionately raises concerns about the status quo of education in our state. And Kimberly Merchant is visiting us today from the Mississippi Center for Justice, where she serves as the managing attorney for the Delta office and as the center's education law director. In addition to her work at the Mississippi Center for Justice, Ms. Merchant serves on the Greenville Public School District Board of Trustees. And my colleague, Kenneth Townsend, a graduate of Millsaps, with degrees also from Oxford University and Yale University, the second-tier schools. He not only has organized this event today, on top of the myriad of things he does for me as a special assistant in my office and also as a professor of political science, but he will also be moderating the panel today. So please join me in thanking Kenneth and in welcoming our panel today.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Rob. And thanks to our panelists for being here. We're really delighted to have you all with us today. This is an important topic. Few topics are more important, I think, to our state and to our region and to our nation. And I'm glad that y'all are here to share some of your observations and wisdom with us. Just a couple of quick introductory notes. For those who didn't see the sign-in sheets available as you exit, if this is the kind of thing that you're interested in, public forums focused on issues of public significance, please give us your name and email address, and we'd love to keep you in the loop for future such programs. As the president said, and just a couple months ago, we had an Affordable Care Act program, and now we're talking about public education funding, and who knows what's going to be next. So please give us your name, and we'll keep you updated. My job as moderator is to be pretty much in the background as much as possible. We've got people who know a lot more about public education funding than I do. So what we're going to do to begin the program is to let each of them speak for 3 to 5 minutes about what their interest is in this subject, what their expertise is as it relates to public education funding in Mississippi. And then we have a few topics that we want to explore, a few particular questions that we hope to engage. But we also want to make sure that we leave time for this to be free-flowing. For the last 15 or 20 minutes or so of the program, we will leave time for audience Q&A. So you see that we have microphones, or a microphone there and a stand there. And another microphone in the back. And we look forward to bringing you into the conversation. So again, welcome to our panelists, welcome to the audience, and without anything further, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Cecil, and you ready to get us going?
Good, thank you, and thank you to Millsaps, and thank you all for being here today. It is an important topic. It's one that tends to dominate the legislature virtually every year, and that is funding for education. It takes up a substantial portion of our state budget, as it should. And it's something that's close to all of us here on the panel. My interest in public education as a policy issue began when I worked at Department of Finance Administration. I'm a CPA by training and background and like to look at numbers. And when I first got over there, I thought, well, let's sort of take a picture of what the state of Mississippi looks like. From a numbers perspective, statistically. So I started going through some data books and looked at all the indicators, economic and social indicators in the state of Mississippi, and we always hear we're near the bottom. It's true. I think we all acknowledge it in many of those indicators we are near the bottom, and I wondered, why is that? Is there some common thread to all of this? And it appeared to me, and still appears to me, that the common thread is we have a very undereducated population. We have some 35 to 40% of our kids who are in the 9th grade who don't finish the 12th grade. We've got a college-educated population of somewhere between 12 and 15%. Now, that's not going to agree with what you see from the census data, but remember, the census data is self-reported data. If you just go through the numbers and look at what's actually happened year after year, that's what's happened. And so we've got this low per capita income, low economically achieving state, and we've got lots of social and health problems. And to me, all of those are related to the relatively low level of education among the population in general. So it seemed to me it was very important that we began to focus more on that. I was not in the legislature at that time. I took a sabbatical from government and went back into the private sector, ran for the legislature in 1999, and have been in the legislature since 2000. Fortunate enough to serve on the Education Committee for 12 years and as chairman for 7 years. My successor, Representative John Moore, is over here. He's the current chairman and is doing a very good job. He's also very interested in education. I also happen to be married to a teacher, and so we spend a great deal of our time at home talking about education from a macro and micro perspective, because they hear the classroom stories and the school stories, and also spend a lot of time reading and researching what's going on in education. I think that the Mississippi Adequate Education Program, the basic funding formula for K-12, funding that, catching up on the funding of that over time is one of the most important things we can do in this state. I don't think we can fully fund it next year, but over time we have got to address the issue of funding public education at an adequate level. I was thinking about this over the weekend, as a matter of fact, and it seems to me when we ask our teachers to educate our kids or perform well in the classroom without giving them adequate resources, it's like asking somebody to dig a ditch, but you don't give them a pick or a shovel. You don't give them the tools they need to do what's got to be done, and that's sort of where we are right now. So that's my interest in it. I'm interested in the numbers, but also very much interested in the outcomes. And we'll say one more thing before I shut up, which is kind of hard for me to do, but I'll say one more thing. It's not just the economic issue that concerns me, it's the social issue, it's the healthcare issues, it's the impact that a lack of education has on people who can't read, write, add, subtract, participate in the world, read a book, read a newspaper, understand what's going on in the Crimea, understand what's going on in Ukraine, understand what's going on in the state and national economy, understand politics and social issues, understand what the issues are in the mayor's race in Jackson. Those are issues that matter to all of us, and it's not just the economic issue. It also affects everybody in their daily life and everybody's family. So thank you again. Pleased to be here and look forward to the rest of the panel discussion.
All right. And so, as the introduction noted, my name is Ravi Gupta, and I founded Nashville Prep, which is a charter school in Nashville, Tennessee, that opened in 2011 to serve students in North Nashville, which is a neighborhood that was traditionally underserved. And so if you grew up in North Nashville at the time that we started the school, the zoned school option was graduating less than 1% of kids college ready in that neighborhood. And so our challenge as we built Nashville Prep in North Nashville, and then Liberty Collegiate, which is our other school across town in East Nashville, was to respond to the parent demand for better options to build a public school. Why I'm here is because we have been inspired by the trends to expand the work that we're doing right now. And so over the summer, the New York Times put out a map that said, what are your chances of going from the bottom quartile of income to the top quartile if you're a child in your lifetime? And the map was broken out by county, and red was bad, blue is good, right? And what you saw is that Tennessee, where we work right now, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, your odds are particularly low of going from the bottom to the top. And so we are here coming to Mississippi, if chartered, and expanding throughout the South as a whole and launching a new organization because we believe that schools can be, public schools can be a vehicle to change that trajectory for kids, whether it's traditional zone public schools, which is the schools I went to up until 9th grade, or alternative models like we're building at Nashville Prep. And so, but we're here, I think like part of the topic here is about the relative relationship between funding adequacy and charter schools. And I think that from just our experience is that our very strong desire here is to advocate with anybody who's interested in public education to increase public education funding in this state. And that we really desperately don't want this to be an either-or conversation, especially given the very limited amount of charter schools that the state seems to be chartering over time. We had 12 applicants. The state, I want to be not presumptuous here, the state of Mississippi had 12 applicants for charters this year, I believe, and we're down to 3 already just based on completeness alone. So we're not talking about a huge amount of schools here, and that's actually the right way to do it. It seems to me, though, we've been building a budget as any school system does, and we are with you on this question of funding. There needs to be a lot more funding, and I think it's also really nuanced. I think special education funding in the state, like in Tennessee, is extremely low, and it's really hard to deliver services on the amount of special education funding that exists here. I think that the models to look at are states like Louisiana, which provide tiered funding based on need. So if you have a really high need, you get more funding, and if you have a need that's met with a lower level of services, you get a lower amount of funding. And so we're just here to participate in this discussion and advocate with folks for more public education funding in the state of Mississippi.
Thank you, Ravi. I'm Todd Ivey. I'm currently serving as the Chief Operations Officer for the Mississippi Department of Education. At least the last time I checked, that was my position. I've been with the Department of Education since March of 1987, so I guess I'm working on over 27 years with the department. If you would have told me when I graduated from Mississippi State University with a degree in business administration that I would spend the vast majority of my professional career at the Department of Education, I would have said, no, that will never happen. I was afforded the opportunity to begin work at the department in the Office of School Financial Services. That's where I have spent the bulk of my career there. The longer I worked there, the more I learned, the more I became immersed in it. I started out working with the old minimum foundation program formula, and became very knowledgeable of how it worked, and then one day, sometime in the early 1990s, somebody started talking about this new thing called the Mississippi Adequate Education Program formula. And so I was in on the ground floor of MAEP and its development and creation, working with the consultants that were brought in to help create that formula, and obviously members of the legislature who helped in development of that formula. Over a period of time, I became, I guess, the subject matter expert almost by default of MAEP. Dr. Tom Burnham, previous state superintendent, had a habit of referring to me as Mr. MAEP, and I asked him to please don't do that. Prior to taking the position as Deputy State Superintendent for Educational Accountability, I was the Director of School Financial Services for a little over 12 years. In School Financial Services, we dealt with assisting school districts in matters of school business operations. It wasn't just MAEP, it was all functions of school business operations. So I've gained a good deal of knowledge on local funding and how local funding works and comes into play. So I'm passionate about education funding primarily because it's been my life for a little over the past 26, 27 years.
I'm Nancy Loome, and I'm a mom of 3 children who are in public school in Clinton, Mississippi. And I am very grateful to the taxpayers of Mississippi for the really terrific education that they are getting there. I was very fortunate when my children were young to be able to stay at home with them for a while. And so when my 2 oldest children, who are twins, entered kindergarten, I jumped in with both feet and became very, very involved at their school, spent lots of time volunteering in their classrooms. And much of that time I was able to spend helping children who were struggling. And so I became very, very aware of the importance of the additional resources that the parents in those schools had to bring to the table to complement the traditional funding sources in our school district. And through those experiences, I also became aware of what must be the reality in school districts where parents do not have the luxury of staying home and being available to their schools and providing those extra resources, which if you're interested in exactly more specifically what those are, I can talk about that later. But so in 2004, they began school in 2001. In 2004, I was really involved and acutely aware of all these issues when there was this debate raging in the legislature about whether or not they should fully fund the Mississippi Adequate Education Program. And I thought, that is the most ridiculous debate I can imagine. I knew that our achievement was low, our funding was among the lowest in the nation, and I could not imagine why our legislators couldn't see the correlation there. So when I heard that there was a press conference being held at the Capitol, my friend and I attended, and we learned how to check our legislators' votes on these issues. And I have to tell you that we were stunned to learn that our legislators were voting against adequate education funding, because we thought the problem was with everybody else's legislators. We couldn't imagine that in Clinton we would elect anyone who didn't support our public schools. And that's an important thing to consider. That what I learned was that our definition of support for public education was just different from our legislators' idea about what that looked like. So when we checked these votes, we went back, we were both on PTA boards at different schools, and we started calling folks and saying, hey, did you know these guys are voting against adequate funding? And to a person, I'm talking about 60 families probably, to a person, they were as stunned as we were and said, why? Why aren't they voting for adequate funding? And we would say, I don't know, call them and ask them. And they did. And pretty soon the legislators called and said, stop telling people about these votes, because we're getting harassed everywhere we go. But it started an important conversation about the expectation of constituents and support for public education. And we began to share that information through email with anyone who wanted to get it. And over the next couple of years, that email list grew significantly, expanded to other school districts who wanted to receive that information. I was doing this from my kitchen table, and every now and then AOL would shut me down because I was sending too many emails. And then I was invited to travel the state with Governor Winter and Jack Reed, who were chairing the Coalition for Children in Public Education. It was just an extraordinary experience, wonderful experience for me, to go around and talk with parents. First of all, to travel with them and hear what they had to say, but to talk with parents about how they could become more involved in these conversations about what they wanted for their children in their public schools. Some of you might remember that we had a rally at the Capitol in 2005, a big petition drive, and we got a lot of media attention around that. And so in early 2006, I got a phone call out of the blue offering me funding if we would incorporate. And I was stunned and said, let me go talk to my husband about that. I was still a stay-at-home mom at that point. And so the Parents Campaign was born. And since then, we have had over 63,000 moms and dads and grandparents and people like you who have signed up to get our emails to find out what's happening with legislation that affects their schools and how to contact their legislators and have conversations with them. And so that was my journey here, and that's my interest. I still, every day, think about those sweet children that I got to work with in kindergarten and first grade and second grade, and how important it is that they have the resources that they need so that they've got a shot at a decent future. It's the only shot that so many of them will get, and it's really important.
Good afternoon. I want to begin by saying that education is a civil rights issue. And the reason that it is because quality education is critical to someone being able to get affordable housing. It's critical to someone being able to have sufficient health care. It's critical to contributing to our economic drivers in each of our communities. And the reason why it's a civil rights issue, because every child in the state of Mississippi should have the opportunity to get a quality education. And it's really about opportunity. Sitting on my school board, I know what it's like to have to meet with the superintendent and make decisions about which position we need to cut because we can't afford it anymore. Graduation coaches, they're critical. But is it going to be the graduation coach? Is it the counselor at the school? Is it the inclusion teacher? Those are the kind of decisions we're having to make. I won't get into depth about how the Mississippi Adequate Education Program is actually funded, but I will say this. When you cut the Mississippi Adequate Education Program, the districts that suffer the most are the ones that are in the most poverty. They depend on the Mississippi Adequate Education Program to equalize funding. And so when you cut the mechanism that is meant to equalize funding, the districts that are suffering the most are the ones that suffer the most. Nancy was talking about her child is in Clinton, and that's interesting because I remember reading the newspaper last year, and every child in Clinton, or I know a number of students, were getting iPads. And I went to my superintendent and said, why can't our kids have iPads? And so this school year, we were able to give our kids iPads, but I work in Sunflower County where those kids will not see iPads. If Clinton can get iPads and Greenville can get iPads, every child in the state of Mississippi should be able to have iPads. And that's what I'm talking about, educational opportunities. I was one of those students that they said at risk. I was raised in a low-income family. And I was sharing with somebody yesterday, and when I went to law school, how my mama had to go into a retirement in order for me to pay for the bar exam. I went to school with students whose dads were judges and lawyers, and they had opportunities that I would never see. I was blessed to be able to get from there and be an attorney now and to be able to have the opportunities that I have, but it was a struggle to get there. And so I could have very well been born to a mother who was a crack addict, and I wouldn't be sitting here today. I had a mother who struggled. She was a teacher and gave me what I needed so that I could complete law school, so that I could take the bar exam, so that I can be who I am today. But we shouldn't have to make those choices. Every child should have equal opportunity. And until Mississippi has a mechanism that allows every child to have the equal opportunity to education, it will continue to be a civil rights issue. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, panelists. Wow. I'm even more impressed after hearing from you. Thanks for sharing these reflections. I don't want us to spend the whole time on this, but I do think it could be useful for many of us in the audience to hear just a little bit about how MAP is actually calculated. So, Todd, not to put you on the spot, but since you're Mr. MAEP, apparently, we've learned, will you share just for a few minutes how MAEP is calculated? And again, we recognize that you can't go into the full detail, but just to help us get started on that point.
I guess I walked into that one.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, I will try to simplify this. And MAP is really not a complicated formula. I know a lot of people think, well, it's complicated, but trust me, if I can do it, it's not complicated. The formula, the basis of the formula is the base student cost. The base student cost is, there are 4 components to the base student cost: instruction, administration, operation and maintenance of plant, and ancillary. Ancillary is librarians, guidance counselors, psychometrists, that area. And what we do in calculating the base student cost is we look at all the school districts in the state, all the public school districts in the state. In order to be eligible, and that's my term, in order for a district to be eligible to be used in the calculation, first criteria is that a district has to be a C district. Not A, not B, not D, not F, but C only. So any district who is not a C district is automatically disqualified from being used in the calculation. The second step is where we go in and calculate the individual component cost. There are efficiency screens for each of those component costs. For instance, for the instruction component cost, we look at a student-teacher ratio. I think it's the number of teachers per 1,000 students. In order for a district to be used in the calculation of the instructional component, you have to be within 1 standard deviation above the mean or 2 standard deviations below the mean of the statewide average of that ratio. Okay, so if you fall outside those standard deviation ranges, then you're kicked out. So that's going to leave you with a subset of school districts that probably is going to vary from 35 to 40 school districts from year to year. Then it's a simple matter of looking at what these districts expend in instruction. That's defined in statute using accounting codes. Fund functions and objects accounting codes. So we know what districts expend. They have to report that to the Department of Education on an annual basis. So we simply total up what each of these districts spend in these funds, functions, and objects as detailed in statute, and then we simply divide that by these total districts, the total number of months 1 through 9, average daily attendance for these districts. That gives you basically an average per student amount. We go through that process for each of the 4 cost components, administration, operation, maintenance, plant, and ancillary being the other 3. The efficiency screens are a little bit different. For administration, we look at basically what we refer to as a supervised to supervisor ratio. For operation and maintenance of plant, we look at the total number of maintenance staff, the square footage of heated space in a district, and for ancillary, we look at the number of librarians, guidance counselors, psychometrists per 1,000 students, I believe. So we go through that screening process. At the end of the day, you end up with a cost for each component. You simply add each component cost up, and you arrive at the base student cost. That base student cost amount is, if we have, for instance, a pay raise, or we have a cost of a fringe benefit increase, or health insurance, or something along those lines, that base student cost has to be adjusted to cover that. So we add that to the base student cost. That calculates the base student cost. To distribute those funds, the base student cost is multiplied times each district's months 2 and 3 average daily attendance for the previous year. And when I say for the previous year, it's the year previous to the year that we were appropriating for. In other words, the legislature just finished with their 14 legislative session, where they appropriated for fiscal year 15, school year 14-15. The ADA that we used to calculate MAEP was based on this current school year, the 13-14 school year. So you are 1 year behind on the attendance numbers that you use to calculate. Really, that's the only way we can do it, because when the MAEP was brought online, the legislature determined, as opposed to the old minimum program, when they appropriated funds for education for the upcoming year, they didn't want to come back and make a mid-year adjustment the next year. So the only way to do that was to use a prior year ADA number. There is a high growth component to MAEP where we try to take into consideration those districts. DeSoto County is a prime example. Madison County, Rankin County, these districts that see a tremendous growth from year to year. We obviously, if DeSoto County has an enrollment increase of 1,000 kids, then we obviously aren't going to have any funding in MAEP for them, because we use the previous year's average daily attendance numbers. So there's a mechanism for increasing funding for those high growth districts. Multiply base student cost times average daily attendance. The at-risk component is 5% of the base student cost multiplied times the number of children on free lunch in a school district, free lunch only, not free and reduced. So you add those two numbers together, that becomes your MAEP formula allocation prior to the local contribution piece. Now, the local contribution piece to MAEP that's the equity piece to the formula. Local contribution is the dollar amount that we will reduce a district's allocation by, and it's going to be either the value of 28 meals in each individual school district, or 27% of the formula amount, whichever's less. The equity is that in some school districts, property values are extremely low, so the value of 28 meals is low. So what happens is their local contribution is less than a district whose Madison County, where a meal is probably worth well over $1 million. So Madison County ends up having a larger local contribution than a smaller, poorer district. It's capped at 27%, obviously. So when you look at the equity piece in MAEP, when you calculate, when you get a by student number on state funding, those districts with a lower local contribution amount will be receiving a higher per pupil amount than property-rich districts. Obviously, those districts aren't going to receive as much funding, but that's going to be a factor of having a much lower average daily attendance. So that's the equity piece to MAEP. So that calculates your formula piece. There are 5 add-ons to the formula: special ed, voc ed, gifted, alternative school, and transportation. The add-ons are calculated or determined the same way they were under the old minimum program. Special ed, voc ed, and gifted are based on teacher units, whereby the state reimburses the school district for the cost of that actual teacher based on certification and years of experience. A special ed teacher, voc ed teacher, gifted teacher. The alternative school is it's a formula. I will tell you, don't ask me how it was derived. I would tell you the story, but Cecil probably wouldn't want me to.
We'll let Cecil get into the politics, the sausage making in just a moment.
Alternative school is simply nothing more than taking months 2 and 3 average daily attendance for grades K through 12, grades 1 through 12, and multiplying that times 3/4%. That gives you an alternative school unit amount. The minimum number of units that a district can earn is 12. So if that math works out to be less than 12, you automatically receive 12. Then we simply multiply those units times the statewide average per pupil expenditure for the previous year to arrive at the alternative school funding amount. Add all those up, and that becomes the total cost of MAEP in a given year.
So pretty simple, right?
He said a third of the way through. He said very simple. And
Sorry.
So I see why you're called Mr. MAP. Thank you, Mr. MAP.
Am I done now? Can I?
So it seems to me that there are a couple of big questions that would be worth our consideration today. When we think about funding, and I guess we'll start down the other end, Kim, if you'll start answering this question. One question concerns how much money do we need? Do we have enough money? And then there's a related question, or maybe it's just a completely different question, about how we spend the money that we have. Sometimes you hear people say, well, it's not so much a problem of not having enough money, but it's a matter of spending the money that we have in effective ways. So I'd be interested in getting the other panelists. We're going to skip Mr. MAP for now, if you don't mind, Todd, because I'd be interested in hearing the other takes.
Catch my breath.
Let you catch your breath, right? On how you would answer these questions, how much money do we need? Is the problem that we're just consistently underfunding MAP, or is it that we're not spending money that we have very wisely? And then the related question is this. If we are to increase funding, from your vantage point, what needs it the most? What are the areas that need funding the most? Is it bringing in new teachers? Is it school supplies? Is it transportation? Is it after-school programs? Based on your experience and observations, how would you respond to these questions? And I'll start out with you if you don't mind, Kim. Yeah.
How much money do we need? That's not a simple question. I think it would vary from district to district. Yeah. When Mr. Ivey was explaining the formula and he was explaining that they used the C-rated districts, which are kind of middle line, I am remiss that Mississippi thinks that a C-rated district is appropriate for funding across the state. I mean, that's the baseline. That's a problem in and of itself. I can tell you that districts with lower property values clearly need more money. Districts who are failing currently need more money. And I would just like to see, I think each district should be funded in a manner that each student could get equal opportunity. I'm going to keep saying educational opportunity because it is the key. And what I mean is that drives a student's ability to take AP courses, a student's ability to have access to dual enrollment, a student's ability to join the Key Club. I mean, we take that for granted, but I know schools in Sunflower County, they don't even have a student council. I mean, they have no clubs, Beta Club. Those are the opportunities that students should be entitled to. And they don't have it because the money's not there. Is there some misspending? Of course there is. Anytime you deal with money and you have so many different organizations or school districts, somebody don't know what they're doing. That's why we have oversight. That's why we need oversight. So you're always going to have misspending. Are there smarter ways to spend money? Of course. And we have to sit down, even in my school district, and make these decisions. But asking how much do we need, that's a hard question because I think it's going to vary from district to district. I think every superintendent in every school district would have a different answer for you. And I think every school district, when you asked about the different areas, would need money in different areas. Maybe one school district doesn't need additional funds in order to pay their teachers, but they need more money to have, like I say, these other opportunities like AP courses and dual enrollment, which I find lacking from a lot of schools. A lot of times they don't have programs like that. And so it's not a simple question to ask, and I think it would be different from district to district. But I think we need to keep into account that when we do fund education, that there are districts that are suffering, and those are the districts that are, again, with the lower property values, and definitely those that are failing. And when I say that, in terms of the Mississippi Department of Education, because I live in a district and in an area where a lot of schools are being taken over by the state. So to have a formula, and I would be remiss as an attorney to also mention that the law requires MAEP to be fully funded, although it's not. And so to live in an area where the State Department of Education comes in and takes over school districts, and they're not fully funding that school district, and they're there for 4 and 5 years, and the district continues to fail, the answer's not easy, is the best answer I can give you.
Perfectly reasonable. Thanks. Nancy, do you want to weigh in on that?
Sure, I'll address a small piece of that.
Sure.
And one of in talking about where should these funds be spent, I'll agree with Kimberly that it depends on the district. That is going to be different for every single district. But one of the categories of expenditures that's really gotten a bad rap is administration. And I just want to spend just a second talking about that, about the goal of spending all of our funding in the classroom versus administration. Certainly the classroom is where the rubber meets the road, and we've got to get funds to the classroom. I would argue that perhaps the most important person in that building is the principal. The principal sets the tone for your school. The principal will determine whether you have great teachers or whether you don't, and whether those teachers get the professional development that they need, whether they identify their strengths and weaknesses and build on their strengths and address their weaknesses. All of that happens with the principal. Those are really important people, and we need brilliant ones. Also, I think we're not thinking about all of the expenditures that might fall into the administration category. One of the big topics of discussion in this most recent legislative session was what is happening with children with special needs in our schools. And one of the solutions that was proposed was a voucher so that the parents of these children could take that money and go to private schools. The problem is, and certainly in some isolated cases, there probably is an issue with competency and how the program is being handled. But in the overwhelming majority of these cases, what we have is an issue where the special education funding that is provided to the schools does not come anywhere close to the cost of the accommodations that the schools are required by law to provide for these students. For example, in most schools, they get maybe $1,000, well, it's usually more than that, $1,200 to maybe $2,000 above what the base student cost would be for a regular ed student without an IEP or special needs for any accommodation that child might need. So the school is not reimbursed for the accommodation. There is simply this amount that is available. But the federal law requires that the school district provide any accommodation that child qualifies for. So what happens in so many cases is that parents who obviously want their children to have every opportunity to be successful, I want the same thing for my children, they might hear about or know of an accommodation that they would like to have for their child. It might not be something that child actually qualifies for according to the IEP, but it might be an accommodation that the parent wants. So when the parent requests that of the school has a budget, a very limited budget, and the school has all these other children that have accommodations that are required in their IEPs that the school must provide to them regardless of the cost. In many, many of these cases, the cost will exceed $50,000 per child. There are some that are $100,000 a child, $200,000 a child. Remember, they got $2,000 for that child, and that funding has to come from somewhere. It comes from the local contribution. Sometimes it comes from other MAEP funds. The district has to find those funds wherever it can. Lots of those, if they're not teacher units, some of those costs might be charged to an administrative function or a plant and maintenance function or something. It's not a direct instructional cost. But certainly we want those children to have those accommodations. This is a very complicated issue, and the answer to it is not to say, well, here, take this little bit of money and good luck to you and hope you can find, another school somewhere else that might be able to meet your child's need. The answer is to do exactly what Mr. Gupta suggested and to do a better job of funding all of the needs of our children so that they can meet their potential and get where they need to go so that they can be productive citizens and have good lives and accomplish their dreams too. So we need to lift that up and to help educate other people that isolating all expenditures and saying that we only want to fund things that are direct instructional costs that's going to hurt children if we do that. That is a really bad idea, and we need to think more broadly than that. So that's my soapbox for the moment.
Yeah, I want to just wholeheartedly agree with the point about special education funding. I think, and to give you an idea, one of the benefits that we have, it's also a tremendous challenge, is that we operate at the school level only up until recently. Now we are in our way turning into a small system of schools. But as a principal of a school over the first few years, what Nancy outlined is very real. And so, for instance, we have a student who came through with a significant special need our first year, and it wasn't an academic need, it was actually a physical need. And the cost of providing some of the services that were required was actually 6 figures. We got super lucky because the mother of that child happened to work in the same building that we incubated our school, and she signed a waiver so that the mother could provide the services and train a staff member to do it. But if in our first year we would have been and we love that child. She's still with us, so we want to provide the best possible services for her. But if we would have had to provide those services in our own expense, it would have been more than 10% of our first year budget for one student. And so there needs to be tiered funding. I think Louisiana has a very healthy debate right now going on about special education tiered funding. What makes it really difficult is that the tiering of it is not enough right now, right? So if it is like in Tennessee, which is like $1,200 to $1,400, and they just tier it off of that, it will not be enough to provide a strong educational program for students with special needs. And so I think that this is a real debate, one that I look forward to participating in. I think that general education funding, I think, can always be higher. And I think right now this state is 31st in general education funding, according to the Department of Commerce last study, right? And so it needs to be higher. I also think that we could spend a lot of time also just from my outside experience looking at some of the sort of macro data about where money's going. It's 31 in funding per student, but it's 9th in general education, in general administration, which means that we're spending, that the state here is spending a lot on general administration, which a lot of times is great. Like as Nancy said, we need to empower leaders in the right way. But I also think that there's some data points there that trouble me as an educator, like the fact that the last statistic I saw showed that there are only 42% of employees of JPS are teachers, which I think is and you can compare that to districts across the state and around this country. That is a unbelievably low number of instructors and teachers. And I'm hoping that the stat is just wrong, because that might very well be true, because that is a low amount of resources going to people who are in the classroom. And what tells me that stat might not be wrong is the fact that if you compare funding in Tennessee, for instance, Nashville, where we operate, to here in Jackson, it is not much different in terms of the per pupil expenditures in the city of Jackson versus Nashville as we currently operate. And we actually as a school operate with $1,000 less expenditures than the district spends. But the starting teacher salary here is like $9,000 less than the starting teacher salary in Jackson. Than in Nashville, which tells me that we can kind of rewire some of the funding to encourage more people to get into education and maybe think a little bit differently about how we allocate those resources.
Well, I want to agree with pretty much everything everybody said. Particularly agree with Kim. We need enough money for every child to have the opportunity to receive an adequate education, period, whatever that number is. I believe that the MAP formula with some tweaks in terms of special education and at-risk kids could perform that basis. At the same time, I think you could give some schools twice the amount of money they get, and not one child in that school would get a better education than they're getting today. The problem, we've got problems. You've got to have enough base funding to provide teachers, provide supplies, provide buses, heating and air conditioning, nice surroundings, key club, those other kinds of things we've talked about, AP courses. At the same time, you've got to have good leadership in the schools. You've got to have good teachers. I can show you, JPS is second lowest rank, I guess, in terms of where it is in terms of ranking. But I can show you schools in this city that are at the highest level, in the lowest socioeconomic conditions in the city, that are performing at the highest level. And right down the street, there'll be a school performing at the lowest level. Same neighborhood, same area, same kids, essentially. Why is that? That has nothing to do with money. They're getting the same amount of money. It has everything to do with leadership, the teachers in the classroom, the principals, as somebody said, I think Nancy said, the principal. It's got to do with leadership. And we've got to fund our schools at an adequate level, number one. We've got to do that. At the same time, we've got to address the issue of leadership in the schools. We have too many school boards and too many superintendents in this state that worry more about the adults than they do about the kids. They worry more about employing their friends, hiring their buddies. I can show you a school district that the state took over that I went to see. High school had 25 people working in the cafeteria. They needed 5. They had 25. They needed 5. The school board told us when we met with them, the board said, you need to dissolve the board. We are dysfunctional. Now, they had a school of 1,500 kids, and they said, we are dysfunctional. Okay. It's just an abomination. It's not just a money issue. And by the way, the funding, for most purposes, the spending decisions are made by the local board, not by the state, not by Todd's chart of accounts. We tell them, we give them the laws, the rules, and regulations about minimum things they have to do, number of teachers, teacher-pupil ratio, safety, soundness, those kinds of things. But beyond that, they make those decisions locally. We give them MAP money, and they spend it. They put it together in a big pot with the local money, and they spend it. They make those decisions. They choose whether to have 5 football coaches or 5 teachers. They choose that. They choose whether to have band or have AP courses. They make those decisions locally. We don't tell them to do that. And we shouldn't tell them to do that. But by golly, we need to hold them accountable. The problems we have are with the leadership. It's with the adults. It is not with the kids. It is not with the children. They are children just like children across this country. Nobody drew a ring around Mississippi and said, your kids can't make it. Our kids can make it, but they're only going to make it if the adults perform at the level that they should, and they are not doing that. That's the problem. I'm for full funding, going to push for that. I think we need to do that. But at the same time we're doing that, we're going to have to hold the people who are spending that money accountable, and we are not doing that.
So that response, Cecil, I think opens up an opportunity to bring in the charter school option in a more concrete way, right? You've talked a little bit about it, Ravi, but is that the way to shake things up? It sounds, Cecil, like you're saying that things need to be shaken up a bit. Whatever's working isn't quite working, that we need to consider doing things a little bit different. And I think we've got somebody here, Ravi, who has an idea on how that could be done. And what I'm hoping is that we actually have a little bit of a disagreement at some point, because everybody's just agreeing with everybody. So I'm going to try to poke a little bit and see if I can get a debate started. But after Ravi outlines whether this might be the answer, I'd be curious to hear from others whether y'all think that's the right thing to do as well.
Yeah, and I do want to say that I think it's important that we started out of areas of agreement, because I think in so many states these dialogues start from a place of mutual distrust, and so it's really great to just come here and start with the areas of agreement, because it's become so toxic in so many places. And one of the benefits that the state of Mississippi has is to start a dialogue that takes into account many of the lessons learned in some other states where people were throwing darts at each other from the beginning. And so it's actually quite refreshing to start where we all agree, where a lot of us are working our hearts out on this issue. And it's really, it's a true blessing to be here and start with common ground. I think that I am not pro all charters, and I want to make that very clear. I think there are some really terrible charter schools out there, and I spend more time worrying about them than anything else. I think there are some states out there that have gotten this wrong. If you look at states like Michigan, Ohio, Arizona, they passed laws that allowed anybody to start a charter school. Some of those states even allow for-profit institutions to start charter schools, and what wound up happening is a blossoming of a ton of schools without much accountability, without anybody knowing what they were doing. Some people well-intentioned just didn't have the skills and the team to pull it out, and some people with some poor intentions looking to make profits off of kids or just to find another job. And so one thing that I think is really great about the state of Mississippi, not defending the way any law was passed here, is that the one thing that I, as an experience of an operator going through here, is that one thing that is very apparent to me is that the state is very seriously taking the authorizing process. They started with 12 applications, as I said before, and got down to 3 on completeness alone. The questions asked seem very appropriate, and I will probably be able to report back in 2 weeks whether the vetting process was appropriate. Hopefully we'll make it through it. But what it will yield is a very small amount. It might even just be us. A very small amount. It might not even be us, right? Amount of schools who operate autonomously from school districts and are able to carry out their own program. I think that that is the promise of charters, is that you can get to see a little bit about what Mr. Brown was talking about in terms of the ability of people to have the freedom to carry out a program. And what Nancy was saying, like principals really can be the change agents. So a charter allowed me to go to our families and say, well, what do you need? And they wanted more discipline. They wanted more order. They wanted longer school days so they can catch up on academics. They wanted a strong data platform to help us respond to data and help students based on their misunderstandings. Not all parents, but the parents that we served. And that was only possible through the charter mechanism, but it shouldn't be. Right? So districts can and should empower principals to budget, make decisions, allocate resources, develop the curriculum they need. And actually, my true dream is not a chartered world, but a world in which principals and teachers are empowered to make the decisions that we've had the blessing of being able to make as an institution.
Somebody want to weigh in and make any counterpoints on
Well, I'll weigh in, but I don't think I'm going to make many counterpoints.
Okay.
I'm going to disappoint you.
Well, I'll keep poking.
Okay. Well, and I'll tell you, we at the Parents Campaign really struggled with this question of whether, or this was years ago when we were first addressing what our position was going to be on charter schools. And the struggle for us was some children versus all children. And I will tell you that every single decision, the positions that we take on any education legislation are based on what is best for all or most children. We don't consider too much, we don't worry too much about the grown-ups in the system, we worry about the kids. And so our struggle was, if a charter school is going to help a few kids, but perhaps remove from that school those parents that I talked about that are so critical to bring more resources to the table. You know, they remove those from the traditional school because those are the parents that are more likely to know about and take the initiative to go apply for a spot in the charter school and all of that. And so we weren't worried about the funding leaving the schools as we were about the human capital that would leave those schools and perhaps leave the children who remained there, who also deserve a great shot in a further diminished situation. And what we came down to was, okay, if you've got a school that is failing, nobody's getting a good shot. If you can help some of those, you probably should help some of those. Now, our real preference would be to convert the school and help everybody, but most charters don't want to do that. It is very, 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 very difficult to take a failing school with its existing culture and turn the whole thing around. It is much easier to get a fresh start with a new school and a subset of that campus and go forward with that and help some kids. And so our position, we had a very specific position on charter schools. We had some die-in-the-ditch issues that we wanted to see in charter school legislation if we were going to support it. And at the top of that list was the for-profit issue. We did not want for-profit schools coming into Mississippi for all the reasons that Ravi suggested. And we got those issues in the charter bill that passed. It's not a perfect piece of legislation, but it does restrict charter schools to failing schools, which we think is important, or D and F, which we think is important because of that human capital issue, and if you're going to pull kids out and save some and all of that. You don't want to harm a good school and perhaps turn it into an unsuccessful school if the kids there are already getting a good education. We don't see, this is not about choice for us. This is about making sure that we help as many kids as we possibly can help in the state of Mississippi get a great education.
Okay. Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Could I follow up?
Sure.
I want to follow up on the charter thing. I'm a supporter of charter schools. I've introduced charter school bills 10 years in a row and never could get it out of committee. Even as chairman, I couldn't get it out of committee. That shows something about my effectiveness as a chairman, I guess. Shouldn't have said that. But I favor alternatives for all kids. I favor online courses. I favor homeschooling. These kids are not our kids. They are kids of a family. The family should have options for their child. And I want to disagree a little bit with what parents, this is our disagreement going right here, with what the Parents Campaign argued about D&F schools. We have a large number of, or a substantial number of kids in successful schools who are not succeeding. That's just the world that we live in. You've got kids that are too short, that are too tall, that are not smart enough, that are not pretty enough, they're too fat, they're too skinny, they're not athletic enough, they don't fit in, they don't make good grades, whatever it is, they're not succeeding. And those kids deserve an option also. If you live in a small community and your child is trapped in a school where that child is not succeeding for some reason, then there should be alternatives for the family, and we don't have those alternatives. Now, in a perfect world, we would. It's not a perfect world. We won't ever have those in every district. Charters won't be in every district because some schools are too small. Some districts are too small. Some areas are too rural. It's not going to work for everyone. If we get 3 charter schools, they'll have roughly 200 kids apiece. That's 600 kids. We got 450,000 kids in public schools. Charter schools are not going to endanger the public schools. That's just ridiculous. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So I favor all that. I don't know what we do about that, but I do think we've got to do a better job of addressing the needs, not just of failing schools, but of failing children. Kids, individual kids who are not successful, and we don't have enough counselors, we don't have enough social workers, we don't have enough. And if you ever want to talk about all that, I can tell you about my wife's stories in her school with the transgender kid and the 16-year-old kid who's raising his son, and the kid who's on parole, who's in her math class. Those are the kind of real issues that are out there, and we're not addressing those issues. So,
can I jump in for a second?
Sure.
Did anybody here read the Atlantic article from last week that talked about the Tuscaloosa School District? Anybody read it? Yeah, I see a lot of heads nodding. What keeps me up at night, and I want to acknowledge again the obvious, which is that I am new to this discussion in this community. What keeps me up at night, because it's also related to what we go through in Nashville, are stories like that. And for those of you who don't know, it's all about the resegregation of the Tuscaloosa school system. And what worries me is that we in the charter community are not right now doing a great job of participating in the solutions to those types of problems. And what worries me even more is that I actually want to, but as we come to Mississippi, the biggest area of distrust around the operation of charter schools, and those of you who are veterans of the legislative debate know what I'm talking about, is that we will be segregation schools. Why does that worry me? It worries me because this funding discussion is about also bringing people back into the system, and the resegregation of schools is the phenomenon at its heart is also contributing massively to the underfunding. People are leaving the school systems, right? And this is not just like a lot of people make the argument that the educators are failing and people are leaving the system. Like we all know that's not the only piece of this, right? And maybe not even the biggest piece of it. It has the deep historical forces at play here. And so we want to be a part of the solution to this resegregation problem, but the biggest area of mistrust around charter schools is that we will be segregation academies. Therefore, if we attempt to create schools that are of mixed income and race, we open ourselves up to a charge of creating those segregation academies. And so I just want to put that out there, and I do this, and those of you who've seen me speak a couple times, I put this out there every time I speak, because one day we want to be a part of the solution to this. We know we can't start there, but we feel like if there's a way that charters can play a part in bringing people of different backgrounds together in schools, we would love to be a part of that solution.
Great. I want to make sure that we leave time for audience questions. So I'm going to put one more question out there, and whoever seems most keen, we'll let a couple of you take a bite at the apple. But one of the things that struck me when we went down the row here, our first speaker talked about education's relationship to so many other social ills. He talked about how it's related to so many of the other problems that these kids face. And you've also made the comment that you can throw money at some of these schools and these kids are still going to have a tough time. My father's a guidance counselor at William Sullivan in Holmes County, and his kids come from really tough spots. And he struggles sometimes to know how much money would it take, and is there amount of money that would help these kids succeed? And Kim, at the end, you referenced how education is a civil rights issue and how without a properly educated population, so many other things can't fall into place. It seems to me that at the end of the day is one of the biggest challenges that we face is, what do we do in these places that are struggling most? I mean, what do we do? Is there a solution, or do we just throw our hands up? Because for better or worse, charter schools are probably going to have less of an impact in a lot of these more rural areas. Anybody have a magic bullet for what we could do to help these really tough spots? Because it seems to me that if our public schools are not doing something to help these most disadvantaged kids, then we're really failing in some significant way. But I don't know that we have reached a solution, or maybe somebody's put it out there and I missed it. So anybody want to take a bite at that apple?
I could talk a little bit about our experience at Nashville Prep, what we do, but I want to also caution that this is not the solution, right? So what do? We extend our school day, so it goes from 7:30 to 5. We offer double the amount of literacy and math. We have an extensive system for giving feedback to teachers and coaching them. And this is not just stuff that we came up with, obviously. It's, if you look at study after study, like Roland Fryer out of Harvard, he outlines high-powered tutoring, high expectations, extended school day, double the amount of math, triple the amount of literacy. These are all things that can work almost anywhere to help improve the outcomes for kids, but it is just the beginning. And it's also not for everybody, right? So, like, I think that you can't 9 to 5 your way to solutions to problems of the deep historical significance that we work on every single day. But I also know that there has to be something closer to a more sustainable solution than what our team is working on every day, because it is incredibly difficult work, and it can't be something that in its isolated form in our institution is scaled in its exact way. And so it's something that keeps me up at night for sure.
Yeah.
There again is no easy answer to that question. But it really goes back, and he keeps alluding to it, but it's really about race. So in those districts where segregation of the school districts has occurred, the reason why we have white flight has nothing to do with money, originally why it happened. And so even in the Delta where I'm from, I truly believe if you stuck a charter school in the middle of all that, that's not what's going to attract the white students back to the schools. What's ailing these communities is something that's going to have to be fixed within each of the individual communities. And we talk about this all the time, but we're going to have to find a way for the white population in those areas to have buy-in and investment. You know, they pay their taxes, and so these are their dollars as well. But even with that, they continue to send their kids to private school. And I'm talking about school districts where we have 98% black kids in the public schools and 98% white kids in the private schools. So I think it goes deeper than that in terms of resegregating the schools. We worry in my school district about charters coming simply because, and believe me, in terms of funding, when MAEP is cut, it affects public and it will also affect charter schools. I think it will affect even where they decide to go. Simply because Jackson is a much better area. DeSoto County, if they could, would be a much better area simply because they have the local tax base to support a school. Now, I do know there's some interest from where I live, and that's a concern for us on the school board. But I also want to take issue with accountability. So when we say they're in D and F school districts, as a school board member, I have to become intimately involved in how that accountability piece or model is generated. They're continuously changing it, and in a lot of aspects, it's completely unfair. So when you call us a D or an F school district, that does not tell you how our kids are succeeding. That does not tell you their academic achievement. There's so much that goes into calling these grades that it's completely and utterly unfair a lot of times. And some people get a really raw deal because of that. And I don't think it's an accurate depiction of the school district. Unfortunately, that's what they're using to determine where charter schools can go. But the question was, is there a silver bullet? Of course not. It took us a long time to get to where we are, and it's going to take a long time to fix it. But race is like the elephant in the room where I live. It really is. And no one wants to talk about it. No one wants to have that discussion. But until we figure out how the white community reintegrates into our public school system and again, have buy-in and they understand that until we all come together to lift that community, we'll continue to struggle. And that's why the Delta continues to struggle.
I appreciate that candor. I think it's important to acknowledge these realities. We can't fix the problems until we acknowledge what's at work beneath the surface. I think Nancy and Cecil want to weigh in. And if y'all want to start lining up, people with questions, feel free, and we'll, as soon as Nancy and Cecil make their observations, we'll open up the floor.
Mine's very brief. I don't disagree with anything that they said, but I also think it is absolutely critical that we do a better job of attracting brilliant people into teaching. We need brilliant teachers in the classroom, not just good teachers. We need brilliant teachers. Education has changed dramatically in the last 20 years, and our expectations for our schools have changed, and it requires brilliant teachers with who completely capture their content area, have a real terrific grasp of that, and can explain it 6 ways from Sunday to children. And we are not doing a good enough job in that area.
I want to briefly address the issue of race also. I agree with Kim, particularly in the Delta and maybe some other pockets within the state of Mississippi. However, the numbers are 90% of all kids in Mississippi go to public school, 90%. 80% of all white kids in Mississippi go to public schools. The overall picture for the state is not based, our investment in the public schools should not be based on race. 80% of all white kids in Mississippi go to public schools. 90% of all kids in Mississippi go to public schools. That's the fact. So the future leaders of this state, whether it's business or civic or church leaders, whatever it might be, are going to come from public schools. That's just where it's going to come from. That's where people go to school in this state. So she's right. In too many places, white folks have abandoned the public schools, but that is incredibly short-sighted when you look at what's happening and where the rest of the public, where your neighbors, your church members, the people your kids are going to marry, the people that are going to be responsible for this state in the future, where they go to school, it's in the public schools, and we have all got to support the public schools.
Great. All right. Well, thanks, panelists. This has been a ton of fun. I think this is a conversation we could have all day long. But let's go ahead and open up the floor for some questions, because I know some people came here keen to ask their questions. And in many ways, we only began to scratch the surface of this really complicated subject, right? But I think we scratched it in a good way. So, Dee, you want to start us off?
Hi. I'm Dean Spoke with the Mississippi Economic Policy Center, and I wanted to push back on, well, not push back, it's opposition, Ravi and Cecil. So we're talking about charter schools within these different districts, and I think the opposition, when we're talking about race, falls along racial lines, right? And so when people I'm talking to, their opposition is that they feel that charter schools are taking funding and therefore resources from their school districts, and this typically falls within communities that are really suffering. So what do you do to start repairing that really lack of trust? You mentioned that you want to be part of the solution, but what are some of the solutions that you are proposing?
Great. And I would say that where we currently operate, the opposition is not racial. I wouldn't say that there's a trend one way or the other, but I do recognize that what's true of one city is not going to be true of the other. How do we participate in the dialogue? It's to do things like we did this morning, which is do the community coffee and get up and explain what's working with our current student population and how we plan to bring that model here to help kids and families. And so for us, we started with a group of kids who, as I said before, had at that time a less than 1% chance of getting a college-ready ACT and being successful. And we provided a set of solutions that our parents were asking for that have done a lot of good for our kids. And so for our kids, we said that after 2 years, we would exceed the results of Williamson County, absolute. So that's like our Madison County, highest performing county in the state of Tennessee. People laughed us out of rooms when we set that goal. People said it wasn't possible because we're over 90% students of color, over 8% African American, over 8% free and reduced lunch, dramatically lower academic performance than the district average. And our scholars did it. And we did that because we partnered with families, community organizations, and we worked really, really hard to implement the set of solutions that I described before. And some of those solutions I think can work in a lot of places. It's not one size fits all, but I do think that some of those are scalable. Recognizing my limited place in this debate, I am ready, willing, and able to have discussions with anybody who thinks that we as an institution have something to offer to the larger debate about the future of public education in the state.
If I knew how to build trust about charter schools, I would not have tried 10 years unsuccessfully to pass the charter school bill. I don't know the answer. I think Ravi's right. It's a community effort. There's a lack of trust among a lot of issues, particularly around race, as Kim mentioned earlier. And we've got to build those bridges about not just about charter schools, but a lot of other things, political and civic and other things too. So you know that as well as I do. And charter schools are just a part of it. I wish we had not had as many problems as we have, but we just have to continue to work on it, as Ravi said, and talk to each other about it.
Yeah, and let me just add one more piece that one of the biggest reasons why we came to Jackson was because of community leaders on the ground that we're partnering with, like Bishop Crudup in South Jackson. Because you have no idea how amazing it is to be here on a panel like this and to have the kind of partnerships and strong relationships that we've been building in Mississippi, because we as an institution have struggled to have positive dialogue around our role, not within our actual community, but in the broader community. And that's because of a lot of mistakes we made and a lot of mistakes others made, that we are really glad to hit the reset button as we come to Jackson and Mississippi.
Thank you to all of the panelists for your dedication to our education program. I happen to be lucky enough to attend Millsaps, and I hope that my diploma is not revoked after anything I might have done here, or do. But a couple of real quick questions to Todd, if you don't mind. Is a graduation rate part of the determination of how successful a district is?
Graduation rate is used in determining the district's accountability grade.
Does it have anything to do with MAEP?
Only in that we use districts that are C districts to determine the base unit cost.
Okay, even as a CPA, which I share with Cecil and have known Cecil for a few decades, you gave an incredible explanation. I don't want to test on that, however. A couple of years ago, some retired general officers, which included me and several others from Mississippi, campaigned and lobbied without pay, so we're not registered lobbyists, the legislature about early childhood education. And we met a lot of resistance about that. And I don't know if the people in the room are aware of this, but nationally about 75% of the 18 to 24-year-olds cannot even apply for military service because they cannot pass the Armed Forces admission test. That is pathetic. And as pathetic as that is, most of it is because not only they can't pass the test, by the way, but they don't meet the physical standards, or they're entirely too familiar with law enforcement, which is another factor. But the primary one is education. They can't pass the test. Well, in terms of economic development, I don't know that you need to know anything more than if you can't pass the military admittance test, you're not going to be ready for the kind of jobs we need to develop for the future. So I'm having a hard time understanding, given all the data, and I forget who was talking about how much data they looked at. How could anybody oppose early childhood education, which has been demonstrated around the nation to provide a jump start? This is not no aspersions intended, but it's not a Head Start program by any means. And Todd, I think your department has a huge role in defining all of that. And we had to fight again this year to keep from getting just pushed off the map. And can anybody offer a reason we shouldn't be trying to give those children a good start so they don't enter the first grade? I had one person at my Rotary Club speaking. I asked him, he said, well, the parents need to be doing that teaching. I said, have you looked around? I mean, do you know the stress of the single-family homes and all these other issues? And you expect the parents to be doing adequate teaching. Every district in the state, it doesn't, unfortunately, come up to Tupelo, Clinton, Madison, Ridgeland, and many others. But anyway, is there any reason we shouldn't be fully supporting early childhood education?
No, and I can.
Well, actually, and I'll quit, but one example that I saw was the legislative debate, and I watched it from the gallery, and I guarantee you about half the people that spoke needed to go back for grammar. But it was really embarrassing. But Todd, you got anything?
Well, I can tell you, Dr. Carrie Wright, our new state superintendent of education, she comes to Mississippi from Maryland, and she's bringing in a completely different view, and I think that that's what the state board wanted. And I can tell you that she is a strong proponent of early childhood education, and I think you will see her push and the board push to make that a priority. I've sat in enough meetings with her over the past 6 months that that's a given.
Thank you. We'll probably still have to be back at the legislature, but that's all right.
Yeah, don't stop.
Can I make a quick comment? The last time I looked at the rankings of the Armed Forces Admissions Test, guess where Mississippi ranked? 51st. We were behind Puerto Rico.
Well, I meant to say, in addition to the nationwide average being 75% can't pass, 80% is Mississippi's rate. Yeah. 80%. What kind of jobs are they going to get?
One point on the early childhood education, I think that, first of all, I support it, so I want to make that very clear. One thing, though, as a push on it is how we implement it is really important. And I think the same challenges that we have in K to 12 will play out in pre-K, and so we should be ready for that. So the other day, I was visiting a school in our neighborhood that some of our students come to us from, and there was a teacher in the classroom with kids in the middle of the school year. We're talking a couple weeks ago, watching cartoons. And so whatever it is that allows that to happen will play out in our pre-K too if we don't view the challenge of pre-K the same way we viewed everything else we talked about today, which is how do we make that situation better? How do we make pre-K as strong as possible?
Great, thanks. Sarah?
Hi, yeah. One of the things that I would like to just ask the panelists to always consider is that even though I think, Cecil Brown, you had to kind of remind us, 80% of the children in public schools in Mississippi are white children.
No, 80% of white children.
Children are in public schools. Okay, sorry. Is that there's such a confounding problem in terms of the way we fund education being partly local, partly state, partly federal. And yet, each child's experience is intensely local. It's within one family, within one school. And so where you are matters a great deal. And so that's why we have the Delta and Jackson and Claiborne and Jefferson County and these pockets of places where white flight, we've got almost 100% black public schools, almost 100% white private schools, and we don't have buy-in, and we don't have everybody putting their shoulder to the wheel to make this thing happen. And then the perceptions grow. My children attend a public school in the city of Jackson that offers the most AP courses of any school in the metro area. People don't know that. People think that it's those private schools that are offering those AP classes, or that Madison has more. AP classes. Now, I'm not saying that we don't have trouble at Murrah High School, but we're sending kids to national tournaments for debate. We're sending champion choirs every place. And at the same time, this year, we had great fear that we were going to lose accreditation and that our children were not going to be able to participate in sports and debate and speech and stuff after school. So this whole accountability notion does not take into account that there is an individual child. That's the only 4 or 5 years they're going to be in high school, 4 years. And that's their only shot at doing some of those things. So when we think about holding people accountable, we should not be punishing children. We should be holding the adults accountable. We should also remember that when we grade school districts and we say, how are you performing? We have been systematically starving some of these communities for decades. And then we're going to sit up and give them a test and say, oh, you should be just where everybody else is. We did this, and we're going to have to grow out of it. And it's not just K-12, it's going to be the colleges and universities, because who's in those classrooms in those communities? It's people coming out of our community colleges and our colleges and universities. So we are going to have to put our shoulders to the wheel and grow out of this. But we don't do it just for the suburban districts or just for the Northeast Mississippi districts. We got to do it for all of us. And remember that there's a kid in every one of those classrooms that has a heart that can break.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair.
Well, very briefly, the second richest man in the United States, Warren Buffett, says he calls that the ovarian lottery. Depends on where you're born.
I will give a quick plug to our education department. We've got some representatives, both students and professors back there, and I think they're training some good teachers, so good job. We're just about out of time. I see one other person here, so maybe we'll make this the last question, and we'll just try to keep it relatively brief since it is just about 1:30. So.
Oh, well, you're actually going to have to forgive me. My name's Paul Boger. I'm with Mississippi Public Broadcasting. I had a list of questions. So,
okay.
First, I really wanted to start with there's been a push to make an MAEP a constitutional amendment, essentially guaranteeing full funding every year. What are your thoughts as a panel on that?
I think that's a good question to get at the end. It was on my list, but we just didn't have time. What do y'all think? You want to start?
The push, to clarify, the push is not to make MAP a constitutional amendment. The constitutional amendment would require that the state provide enough funds so that every child had an efficient and effective, an opportunity for an efficient, effective public education. It does not mention MAP. So that is substantially different because MAP is subject to change by the legislature. So it's a constitutional amendment. Right now, we have a constitutional provision that says every child is entitled to a free public education, which really doesn't mean a whole lot. So I'm in favor of the constitutional amendment. It'd be interesting to see how it plays out over time.
Anybody else want to weigh in on this ballot
It's
initiative?
efficient and adequate, but I think the constitutional amendment, the initiative is really just another mechanism to push the state of Mississippi to fully fund MAEP or to at least increase education funding. So it's just another mechanism, just basically saying, look, you guys are not doing what needs to be done, and it's just another weapon in the arsenal of the approach to try and put pressure on the legislature to give the money that's necessary for education.
All right, we'll give you time for one more quick one. We started a couple minutes
All
late,
right,
so we'll let you get one
this
more.
is more for me personally. There's been a debate in this state for several years now versus appointed and elected superintendents. We touched on school leadership earlier. So what should it be? We have elected superintendents. Scott County is a perfect example of failure of elected superintendents. So what should we have?
I've got to answer this question because I do support appointed superintendents. I sit on the school board where we do appoint our superintendent, but I also, based on the education law that we do, go into a lot of school districts. So I've seen elected superintendents and I've seen appointed superintendents. And the worst problem you can have is a situation where an elected superintendent does whatever he wants to do without any accountability because he has 3 people on the school board who supports him. The school board is supposed to be the last stop for every school district. And if you don't have the power to say you're not doing your job and so we need a new superintendent, that's a problem. Sometimes who the community elects is definitely not the best candidate. Also, you hamstring the county. I mean, it's just a very small pool of people. So if we're electing a superintendent in Washington County, maybe the best person is in the neighboring county, or maybe the best person is on the coast and he's willing to come. And you really hamstring yourself into having a superintendent solely in your county when they are elected as opposed to appointed. Appointed superintendents is a must because, like Cecil said, leadership is definitely the key to the success of any school district.
All right, I think we probably should wrap up with that. We're now at 1:33. We promised to let y'all out at 1:30, but let's give our panelists another big hand. Thank y'all so much for taking part in this important conversation. As I said a moment ago, I know in some ways we only scratched the surface, but I think we did a good job, or y'all did a good job. And thanks, Millsaps thanks you, I thank you, and I'm sure the audience thanks you as well. Thank you very much, and have a good day, everyone.